My boyfriend auctioned me off at the town fair. In front of his friends, his family, and hundreds of strangers. He laughed, saying it was just a fundraising stunt. But when his mother stood up, took the microphone, and said, "We can start from scratch because she's worthless," I knew I wasn't in the wrong place anymore. I was in the wrong life. I was Samantha Wells, 27, a waitress at a small coffee shop on the edge of Dry Creek, a place with nothing but sun, wind, and red dirt roads stretching to the horizon. Since my father's sudden death 3 years ago, I've been living alone in a cramped rental above a used car repair shop. I've never had much, but I'm grateful for the little things: steady work, decent regulars, a few friends, and the fond memories of a dad who believed in me. Then I met Ryan Carter. He walked into the coffee shop with expensive shoes, a confident gaze, and a smile that made you think the world was safe. The son of one of the town's most powerful families, Ryan lived in a world completely different from mine, one where imported wines were more common than hand-brewed coffee. I used to think he was strange when he came to my little shop every afternoon, ordered the same black iced coffee without sugar, and talked about things no one ever asked me. What I studied, what I dreamed of, where I wanted to go if I left this place. I fell in love with him, slowly and hopefully. During the first year of dating, I believed he was genuinely trying to build a bridge between our worlds. But when I started observing the look in his mother's eyes, Diane Carter, every time I went to his house party, I realized I was never really invited. Just came along. A silent shadow behind her son. She didn't say anything direct, just a look, and sometimes a sharp joke. "Oh, Samantha, you made this?" It's cute, a little salty, but cute. I used to think that if I was just nice, patient, not causing trouble, I would be accepted. If I just loved enough, the distance would be bridged. But what I didn't anticipate was that there are people who aren't waiting for you to prove your worth. They're just waiting for the opportunity to prove that you have no worth at all. That day, the town fair was bustling, as it always was, long lines of people jostling among the colorful lights, country music playing, the smell of cotton candy and bratwurst. Ryan hooked his arm around me like I was the perfect decoration. "Tonight's going to be fun," he said. "You're going to have a surprise." I smiled and nodded. I didn't doubt it. Because I never thought that the surprise would be me. When he stepped onto the stage and raised the microphone, I was still smiling. Until he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, as part of our fundraiser tonight, we're having a little auction, and the prize is an exclusive date with the coolest girl at the fair." He turned to me. "Samantha, come on up. Don't be shy, it's for the community." I froze. But everyone was clapping and cheering. Before I could react, I was pushed onto the stage. And then Diane stood up, microphone in hand, her voice flat as she read the donation amount. "We can start from zero. I don't think she deserves much more than that." The whole room burst into laughter. Someone whistled. Someone called out, $2. It's my morning coffee." I stood there, trying to keep my legs from shaking, trying to fight the humiliation that was rising in my throat like something hot. My eyes met Ryan's. He was still smiling, as if he didn't understand why I was reacting like this. I thought I was going to collapse. I was ready to run, but then a deep voice from the back of the room cut through all the noise. $1 million. Everyone fell silent. I turned around. And for the first time in 3 years, I realized some people don't need you to prove anything. They just need you to see them. They say after the initial shock, everything fades away. But I remember every second. I remember Ryan's smirk as I turned to look at him. I remember the laugh when a man in a cowboy suit raised his hand and said, $1, but you have to buy dinner." The laughter didn't reach my ears. They stabbed straight to the heart. I had imagined many bad things: being left out at a fancy wedding, being asked condescending questions at my boyfriend's dinner table, being scrutinized from head to toe, but I had never imagined what it would be like to be put up for auction in front of hundreds of people, some of whom had called me that cute girl. On the makeshift stage at the Dry Creek Town Fair, I was not Ryan's lover. I was a spectacle. A distraction. A voiceless commodity. I don't remember how I got on stage. I only remember Ryan's hand warm, familiar, taking mine as if he were presenting me with an award, not the greatest humiliation of my life. "Smile, Sam," he whispered as he pulled me up to the microphone. "Just have some fun. People like you." "People?" He meant his mother, who was sitting in the front row, a glass of wine in her hand, her eyes as calm as if she were watching a fire dance. She wasn't smiling, but her face was filled with satisfaction, as if I was finally being used for my value. I heard the MC read the introduction again, a date with Samantha Wells, the beautiful, the charming, the coffee-making. The crowd laughed. I felt small, standing naked in the spotlight, unprotected by love, by respect, by anything that had ever made me believe I belonged. I glanced at Ryan. He was smiling, his wrist twisting his beer, his eyes cruelly relaxed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him, "What am I to you?" But I knew that even if I asked, I wouldn't get a real answer. Or worse, I'd get something like, "It's just fun, you're so sensitive." The market was still buzzing. The MC was still trying to stir the mood. "Now, do we have any bids? This gorgeous girl would make the perfect weekend dinner companion." A hand shot up. $1. Another table, $2, I'll take her to the movies. A group of young men laughed as one of them called out, $3 if she does the dishes too. I stood there, every cell in my body screaming. Every joke, every clap was like a knife cutting into my self-esteem. I had believed Ryan. Believed the way he said he loved me. Believed that his mom will understand words were true. But now he, the one who had touched my cheek and said you're the best thing that ever happened to me, was making fun of me, smiling as if he had done nothing wrong. I don't know what kept me from running away. Maybe it was because my legs were frozen. Maybe it was because I didn't want Diane to have another reason to say I didn't keep my dignity. Or maybe, and I'm not proud of it, I kept waiting for Ryan to turn around, pull me down, apologize, and say he'd gotten caught up in the crowd, that he hadn't realized it had gone too far. But that didn't happen. The only thing I heard was his mother's voice, clear, calm, from the front row. She took the microphone, adjusted her voice to sound like she was giving a speech at a charity event, and said something that I will remember for the rest of my life. "We can start from zero. I don't think she's worth much more than that." The audience fell silent for a moment, then burst into laughter. It was as if she had just made a brilliant quip. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just stood there, like a block of stone, surrounded by colorful lights and pounding music. And then, when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, a deep voice rang out from the back of the stage. Not loud but clear. Not angry but powerful. It's $1 million. The voice tore through the crowd. I turned around and saw a strange man stepping out of the shadows. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't joking. He just looked straight at the stage where I was and repeated, "I'm buying her. It's $1 million. The whole place fell silent. The laughter, the chatter, the music from the booths around, it was like someone had pulled the plug. I turned, my eyes meeting the man who had spoken. He stood there in the middle of the crowd that had split into a void, as if people had instinctively made way for him. The dark gray suit was exquisitely tailored, the black hair was streaked with silver, the eyes were sharp but not cold, and the voice was what made everyone hold their breath. It wasn't loud, but there was a quietness that stopped the room, as if what he said was beyond doubt. I'd never seen him before. But in that moment I knew this man wasn't here to joke. And he wasn't looking at anyone but me. Ryan smiled wryly. "Oh, someone with a sense of humor," he said, trying to make a joke to save the frozen atmosphere. But the man didn't smile. He took a step forward, pulled out a business card, and held it out to the stage, just as the MC stuttered, "Excuse me, who are you?" "My name is Lucas Hayes. I'm the personal attorney for Mr. Raymond Wells, Samantha's biological father." He enunciated each word, then looked straight at me. "I'm here today as requested in his will." I froze. "My father?" I took a step back, as if the shock wasn't enough, and now it was another blow to the chest. I didn't know my dad had a lawyer. I'd never heard of Lucas Hayes either. After my father died, I received only one call from the local law office, informing me that he had left nothing but a few personal items and unpaid medical bills. After that, I had to take care of everything. Downstage, I saw Ryan's mother, Diane, jump to her feet, her face pale. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed, but Lucas had already stepped to the edge of the stage. He pulled a large envelope from his briefcase, held it up in front of everyone as a living witness, and said, In my hands is the last legal will and testament of Mr. Raymond Wells, signed, authenticated, and sealed 3 years ago, just days before his death. I couldn't breathe. Ryan whispered something to the MC. He looked disoriented and the crowd had stopped laughing. The atmosphere had become tense, waiting. Lucas glanced at them, his gaze enough to silence the whispers. Then he turned back, looking straight at me, not as someone helping, not even as someone pitying, but as someone acknowledging me, in the role I once belonged. I apologize for having to say this here, in front of so many people. But here's what Mr. Raymond has asked. If your daughter Miss Samantha Wells is slighted, humiliated, or excluded from any public event involving the Carter family, I have every right to go public with the truth. The stage was silent. I stood there, my hands still shaking, my head reeling, but my heart was beating again, a beat not of fear but of something like faith. It had been a long time since I'd felt someone on my side, unconditionally. Lucas looked down at the MC. I'm asking you to stop this right now. Miss Wells is not the subject of any bidding. He paused. And if necessary, I will take this to court, first thing in the morning. Ryan froze, his eyes widening in shock. Wait, what's this? You mean, what did her father leave behind? He turned to me for the first time all evening, looking like a man who knew he had lost something he could never get back. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, then back at Lucas, nodding. He understood. He stepped closer to the stage, holding out his hand as if I were the only one left in the room. I stepped off. No applause, no whispers. Just a broken silence. Lucas said softly, just loud enough for me to hear, we'll talk later. But first, let's get out of here. You don't have to stay another minute. And I nodded. Because for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel alone. I followed Lucas out of the fair in silence. No one stopped me. No one dared. I walked through the crowd as if I were leaving a dirty dream, one that I had believed was real. His car was parked not far away at the curb, a shiny black sedan, no special license plate, no ostentation, but clean and solid like him. When the car door closed, when the noise behind me was muffled by the soundproof glass, I realized I had been holding my breath. I sat there, my hands on my thighs to hide the trembling, not knowing where to start. Lucas said nothing. He just drove, eyes straight ahead, as if he understood I needed a few minutes to piece myself together. We pulled into a small hotel, not far from town. Not far enough to be considered runaway, but far enough that no one would accidentally walk in. In a room dimly lit by yellow lights and the smell of old wood, he handed me a glass of water and an envelope. Samantha, he said, his voice lower and more intimate for the first time, your father left you more than you think. I didn't touch the envelope right away. I looked at him. Why didn't I know? Why didn't anyone tell me anything for 3 years? Lucas took a deep breath. Because he wanted to protect you from the rest of it. I opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of my father's will, my father's name, signature, seal, date, all legible, legal. He left me all his assets, his company stock, his real estate, and his control of Wells properties. All of it, undivided, unconditional. Except for one line, 15% of the annual income to be retained for living expenses for other interested parties, without management rights. I understood what he meant. He hadn't completely cut anyone off. But he was very clear about who he trusted with everything. Me. The Carter family, Lucas added before I could fully digest the contents, tried to hide this will. Diane, Ryan's mother, had been Ryan's father's business partner. She had known him since the early days of the company. When he died, she used her influence to persuade the remaining heirs to speed up the proceedings. And most of them took money to keep quiet. I looked up at him, and I got nothing. You weren't there, Lucas said, his eyes softening. And he let me keep the original will on the condition that it would be released only if you were publicly humiliated by the Carters, a possibility he knew was very real. I've kept quiet for 3 years, as requested. But after tonight, I don't need to wait any longer. I leaned back in my chair. 100 pieces of the puzzle were spinning in my head, the looks, the parties where I felt left out, the innuendos from Ryan's mother, the times Ryan said, I know my mom's a bitch. But she loves me. I used to blame myself for not being good enough. It turns out I just wasn't ruthless enough to foresee everything. Lucas placed another stack of documents in front of me. These are the financial records of the past 3 years. There was evidence that Diane and Ryan had used their connections with some of the former board members to illegally siphon money from the company, take ownership of assets, and attempt to legitimize ownership. But since no one had ever owned the legal shares, all those transactions were illegal. And now you have all the power, he paused. You're not just an heir. You're the legal and sole owner. I didn't know how to feel about that. Angry? Relieved? Confused? Probably all at once. For 3 years, I had lived as an outsider, poor, lost, and convinced that love was enough to be treated well. While beneath the surface of my being was a buried truth, an empire I should have long ago been entitled to. I looked at Lucas, who had just pulled me out of a humiliating situation, and who had also brought me a truth far greater than anything I had ever been prepared for. I asked quietly, almost in a whisper, "Why didn't my father say anything when he was alive?" Lucas looked at me for a long time before answering. Because he knew, if you were kind enough, if you were strong enough, then at some point the world would have to readjust how it treated you. And he wanted you to be strong enough to stand when that happened. I turned away. For the first time that evening, I let myself cry. 3 weeks after that fair, I signed the certificate of authority to run Wells Properties as the legal CEO. No more interim, no need for anyone's permission, no need to explain to suspicious eyes. Just a simple, neat stroke of black ink, but to me it was the dividing line between a life of being looked down upon and a life of my own making. I said nothing as I walked into my first boardroom as a leader. The faces who had known me only through the distorted accounts of others stared at me, half skeptical, half curious. I introduced myself briefly, no embellishment, no apology for the past, no boasting about my current position. "I'm here to work," I said, "and I know the worth of every person sitting around this table. I hope they learn to see me the same way." I had no experience running a real estate company, but I had my dad. I had sat at the dinner table with him every night, listening to him talk about every deal, every loss, every moment when I thought I had to give up. I had hundreds of hours reading old accounting books he left in the garage. I had a habit of working until I forgot to eat, studying until I forgot to sleep, a habit that once made Ryan tell me I was too stressed. I should relax a little. And most of all, I had something I didn't think I had left: faith in myself. Lucas was always there, just as he had promised my dad. He didn't interfere, didn't tell me what to do, just provided documents, legal advice, and a steadying presence so I knew I wasn't alone. There were tense meetings, heavy emails, and early mistakes that made me doubt myself. But I got through every one. Not because I was good, but because I don't allow myself to go back to being the girl who needs pity like I was 3 years ago. I don't need anyone's pity anymore. I just need respect. And after 3 months, the company began to stabilize. The best people, those who had been sidelined under Carter, came back, bringing with them a level of confidence I had never dreamed of. I restructured the human resources department, cut back on unnecessary expenses, and most importantly, I reinvestigated all the contracts that had been improperly adjusted by Diane and her mother. The result, over $1 million recovered. Some of it was returned to the company. The rest I used to create the Raymond Wells Foundation, named after my father, for people who were living the life I had lived, quiet, alone, and always on the edge of the circle of opportunity. The foundation supported single women, working poor, and architecture students, talented but helpless people. I wanted to create a system of scholarships, affordable housing, and practical skills training. Not because I was a good person, because I understand the feeling of being looked down upon, being judged just because you have no money, no connections, no family label. I can't change the whole world, but I can do my part. The foundation's launch was held in the company auditorium, which had once been used only for million-dollar deals and corporate parties. I invited the security guards, the receptionists, the parking attendants, people who had always nodded politely to me, but who had never imagined I would be CEO. I stood on stage, no teleprompter, no speech. "I didn't start this foundation for the image," I said, looking straight at the crowd. "I started it because I needed a hand, and I got one. Now it's my turn." Lucas stood in the front row, silent as ever. When the ceremony ended, he was the last to arrive. No compliments, no fanfare, just a short "he would be proud." I smiled, squeezed his hand, and said, "I know." That night I returned to the small apartment I had not left, even though I had enough money to buy another. I sat on the balcony, looking out at the lights of the town in the distance, and wondered if my father had sat like that before, in the middle of the night, tired and worried, but still determined. I had never asked him that. But now I understood him better than ever. I didn't think I'd see them again. Not because I was still angry, in fact, I thought I was. But because I believed that someone like Diane Carter would never bow down, and Ryan wasn't brave enough to face the consequences. But one Friday afternoon, as I was signing a contract to develop housing for single women on the east side of town, my secretary came in, knocked softly on the door, and whispered, "There are two people calling themselves Diane and Ryan Carter. They want to see you, without an appointment." I paused. My eyes fell on the unclosed file. Not because I hadn't thought about this day, but because I didn't know what I would do if it actually happened. I raised my head and said, "Come in." The door opened. They walked in together, slowly and hesitantly, a far cry from the confident, haughty manner I'd seen them in at high society parties, where I was always the silent shadow. Diane wore an old, buttoned coat. Ryan looked noticeably thinner. Neither of them looked me in the eye right away. They sat down across from me when I nodded, then fell silent. The room was filled with the ticking of a clock. Diane spoke first. Her voice was no longer cold, nor was it pretended to be friendly. Just tired. "Samantha, I didn't come here to make excuses. I know my son did something unforgivable. I didn't stop him. We are so used to using money and influence to get things our way." She paused, not daring to look up. Ryan just bowed his head, his hands clasped together until they were white. I was silent. Not because I was trying to bully them, but because I needed to hear the end. After that day, Diane continued, everything fell apart very quickly. Contracts were withdrawn, shareholders backed out, investors lost confidence. I had to sell the villa and move to a small apartment west of town. Ryan. She looked at her son, couldn't find a job for more than a few weeks. Rumors spread quickly, and when people found out he'd auctioned off his girlfriend, no one wanted anything to do with him. She looked up, looking me in the eye for the first time. "But I didn't come to ask for what was lost. I came to ask you to give us a chance to make things right." I looked at them for a long time. The anger I felt was gone. Instead, dead. There was a dull sadness. Because there was a time when I had thought of them as my future family. I had tried to fit into a world that never made room for me. I took a deep breath. "I don't need apologies," I said. "I need action. If you really want to make things right, help me." Diane blinked. "Help you?" I opened a drawer and took out a folder. "This is the Raymond Wells Foundation's new public housing program. We're building a small community in the northern suburbs. Volunteers are needed, staff and career coaches to help reintegrate residents. If you want to make amends, work there. No pay, no status. No cameras or press." Ryan looked up at me for the first time. His eyes, once bright with confidence, were tired but also something like gratitude. I will," he said. "As long as it takes." Diane nodded slowly. "We're ready," I nodded. No smile, no softness. But inside, something was closed. When they left, Lucas came in and handed me another file. "Are you okay?" I didn't look at him, just said, "I'm not doing this to save them. I'm doing it to save myself." He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, silent as he always did. That evening I went to the project site in the north. Looking at the concrete blocks rising on the red earth, I thought of the first house my father ever built. Not big, not beautiful, but solid. Just like the way he lived. I stood there for a long time, then pulled out my phone and texted Lucas just one line, "We're doing it right, right?" He texted back less than a minute later, "Yes." And proud. A year after the night I was auctioned off at the town fair, I sat on the balcony of the top floor of the Wells Properties headquarters, and all looking down at the half-built row of houses that would become homes for people who thought they had nowhere to go. I was wearing a thin gray sweater, holding a steaming cup of coffee, and Lucas was in the kitchen, nagging me gently about not sleeping in on a weekend morning. My life, if anyone asks, is no longer a dream, nor a reward. It is simply the result of my choosing to stand up, instead of sitting there waiting for someone to apologize. I don't think I will ever love again after all. Not because I was hurt too deeply, but because I thought I had nothing left to give, after being made a laughingstock, after my trust was drained. But Lucas didn't come into my life as a hero. He didn't try to heal me. He was just there at the right time in the right way, and always silently. We didn't love each other through promises or sweet gestures. We loved each other through understanding. Through sharing every confusing document, every late night at work, every unexplained look when the past suddenly came back like a cold wind. I remember one time when Lucas took me to the old bookstore down the street, which he said was more sacred than a church. I stood among the shelves of books on law, finance, and architecture, speechless. He came over and asked softly, "What's wrong?" I just shook my head. Then I said softly, "I used to think these things weren't for me." He didn't smile or comfort me. Just say, "Now they can't live without me." I looked at him, knowing that someone like that, not everyone meets in their life. My new life is not perfect. I still have days when I am exhausted. There are still broken contracts, people leaving, projects behind schedule. But I am no longer afraid, because I know I have lived through the worst and survived. I know I can start again at any time. Not because I am good, but because I no longer doubt my own worth. I do not tell this story to demand justice, nor to paint a fairy tale journey. I tell it because I know, somewhere, maybe a small rented room, a temporary desk, or a relationship that makes you doubt yourself, there is someone living the life I once lived. Someone who thinks that if they stay quiet long enough, are kind enough, and humble enough, one day they will be recognized. I want to tell that person you don't need permission to stand up. You can give yourself that permission. And if someone ever makes you feel small, remember, it's not because you lack value, it's because they lack the ability to see it. Ultimately, what I've learned from all this is not how to win, but how to not lose yourself. True power doesn't come from getting even, it comes from living a life where you have nothing to prove. Thank you for listening to my story. If you see yourself in this journey, or if you just need a reminder that you're not alone, I hope you'll keep going, even if it's a slow one. And if you want to join me on my next story, please subscribe. Because sometimes a small click can be the beginning of a new journey. I'm so happy to be with you on this series. If you need me to edit or rewrite it to a more specific voice, southern, softer, or sharper, I'll do it right away.